here promptly. I think we've got 90% of the room filled, which is pretty amazing given the normal traffic conditions here in Jakarta, so thank you for being here promptly. We're going to kick off with a short video, and then Sucheng Chia, our market head for Indonesia, is going to make a few opening comments. Thank you very much. Cue the video.
The year is off for the Bank for American organization OpenAI.
S&P 500 at 52-week closing high.
Interest rates continue to rise. The Federal Reserve raises rates in the U.S. to their highest since 2001. U.S. inflation slows to 3%.
China says the U.S. must change its attitude or risk future conflict.
But fears of a recession seem to be so far unfounded.
Hi, good evening everyone. Welcome to Citi's Wealth Outlook for 2024. It is really with great pleasure that I welcome you to our event today, where our speakers will present their assessment of the global economy and the potential opportunity. Provide you with a comprehensive outlook. So without further delay, let me hand the stage later over to our new trust and partnership with Citi Private Bank. I hope you will enjoy tonight's event and leave with ideas on how you can best position
What's working, what's not working, and most importantly, the key areas that we can look to try and harness within your investment portfolios going forward. Then I'll be back on stage to host a Q&A. You will note on your
tremendous ups and downs in markets and economies. And we have a virus to thank for that. You know, in 2020 and 21, because of the pandemic, when the entire world's economy ground to a sudden halt, everyone stimulated. The Fed added $5 trillion of assets to its balance sheet. The US federal government provided $2 trillion stimulus packages, twice. And because of that, there was a market euphoria. Stocks went up 150 basis points over an 18-month period. The US government reversed fiscal stimulus to fiscal tightening, and that caused, in 2022, a period of decline for both bonds and equities, such as we have not seen in multiple generations. Financial markets, growth and inflation. This is already, we'll probably get to 2.5% in terms of core inflation. And if rent continues on its current trajectory, we might even undershoot and reduce interest rates. Oh, I forgot to mention, we don't expect this slacking in 2022. It recovered very strongly last year, but it had already done a contraction in 2022. Housing was contraction in 22 and 23, and now seeing the early signs of the recovery. Manufacturing, it's been in recession for 2 years and it remains so, just less deeply. The financial industry also facing some difficulties sometimes. But basically, we saw many parts of the U.S. economy express recession-like characteristics over the past couple of years, and we think that actually already released some of the excesses of the economy. So we don't have the overinvestment. GDP growth is only likely to be 1.6%. That makes the Fed too restrictive. So they would probably need to reduce interest rates even if we don't enter a recession. The second reason is much more direct. Because last year we already saw that interest payments account for nearly a third of US government federal outlays. And this year, that amount of outlays is going to rise. They're likely to prefer the Fed to cut interest rates as well. And the third reason is that because the Fed lowers, they also cut interest rates. That was the last hike. And the Fed waited 14 months to cut rates. So that was quite a long period of waiting. But 2 years after the last hike is that we need to beef up our fixed income portfolio. Now, if the Fed does what we expect it to do, then the dollar is likely to go along. In the past cycles, we've seen that whenever the Fed raises rates or cuts rates, it's always more aggressive than the other major central banks. The left side graph here shows the Fed in the light blue line, the ECB in the black line, and the BOJ very flat on the bottom in the green line. Essentially, the Fed is more aggressive way up or down. And economies like China, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore do poorly in terms of equities. When the dollar is weak, everybody gains. That's what life requires. And you kind of notice that India, US, and Japan does well regardless of whether the dollar is strong or weak, and so we think these are markets that this is one of the reasons that these markets I think deserve a long-term position in your portfolio. And finally, before I turn to Rob, average initial impact is negative, but you generally recover almost most of it in 1 month, and then in 3 months you will derail the economy or markets. But what it does,
A big reset. Before that, it was 1969, and before that, it was 1931, when we actually had that negative returns for both equities and fixed income. Actually, 22 was the first time we actually had negative double digit for both asset classes. If you look at 31 and 69, and I think the way we still are kind of with our backdrop here, we had double-digit returns back on that balanced portfolio. So first, a lot of conversations about U.S. equities, and I think this is the important part of it, right? If I were to ask how many of you are aware of the Magnificent Seven, I think every single hand would go up, right? And we're talking healthcare with Israel and Gaza, which had kind of a recent attack on the U.S. outpost on the Jordanian Syrian border. Clearly, there's the opportunity that there could be an escalation. We've seen oil prices moving up. One of the areas in uncertainty, they outdrove it today, people looking to access and act. And it's not just our personal data, it's not just financial records. If you think about every part of the infrastructure, what we focus on is places like Europe underspending on defense. What we see now, unfortunately, with the war in Ukraine, is a big catch-up globally of new areas of technology. You can't get away from a headline of what's going on drone technology, but we see continued spending on the defense complex. The other part is how does this play through on some of the commodities, right? We talk about clean energy, we look about the U.S. needs to rebuild its grid. Areas like copper, not a lot of new supply. Clearly some volatility in the short term on economic cycles, but it's still the key raw ingredient in almost every part of our infrastructure and capex spending business. So once again, headline risk, seeing opportunities below in areas like this in portfolios. I couldn't, be on stage and not say AI, right? If you think about what's played through, it's very opportunistic. It has been a truly transformational capex cycle. So we still see great spending on buyer beware of it. The underlying tailwind is massive. We think this will continue. We're going to spend later on a whole section on healthcare, but unfortunately, we're all getting older. And unfortunately, as we get older, our consumption of a lot of the healthcare products goes up quite a bit. Now, the good part here is, if you think about a lot of the large cap pharma, what's played through in biotech and medtech, we see a significant innovation tailwind. And aside from a handful of big drug companies last year, most of the rest of the sector was left behind, whether it was concerns about rising rates, stopping some spending, whether it was just that the sector had done very well with the med tech companies and also biotech. And it's interesting because if you look back at kind of the far right chart here, it really has been that equipment space that's been left behind. We think there's going to be a lot of innovation and focused validation, right? If we were talking about the opportunities before in the world of China and the US, about is, what we would talk about competition, looking about competing for capital and innovation. One of that's not Q&A. Look, China, if you go through, it's in a transition phase right now, right? Significant amount of wealth tied up in the property side, the property sector having a reset. What we don't see is what played through in the U.S. as the global financial crisis in the last couple of years has been in reverse a little bit. We're starting to see some of what I'll call green shoots forming on headline policy moves. And so when we look on China, we still see the world's second largest economy with long-term perspectives. What I would say is think of China slightly different in the standpoint as opposed to top-down, how much you have in your portfolio. We think of it as bottom-up, and think about some of the great innovation that Chinese companies have done, like battery technology, the world's and talk about the Magnificent Seven. The contrarian person in me says when everybody does not want to talk about something or says it's uninvestable, usually means not a lot has to happen. So I would say just have China on the watch list, 31, 69, and then we'll place it in 22. This is why one of our key messages here is have that core portfolio. Diversification. Ken talked a lot about the bond environment. Bonds can work for you now. Prior to the pandemic, you would have paid a Swiss bank to hold your money. We had negative interest rates across most of Europe. Don't try to market time. At the end of the day, we had a reset in 2022. We had a very narrow breadth of the market last year. We have an opportunity right now, what we talked about in our backdrop here, of an earnings story, kind of a tailwind forming back in on this reset. This is the time to slowly and consistently build up that portfolio. I can promise you, I've been doing this for a long time. My timing in the short term is miserable, right? Over the long term, it's been great. And this is the time to really build up that broad portfolio. We're going to come back with this later on, I think, in Q&A on some of our multi-asset classes, our positioning on the GIC. So I won't spend a lot of time right now, but you guys will all have this, I think, it's actually in the chart books. But you can see some of our focus here on over and underweights. And just a couple of things. Our biggest probably shift has been some parts of the fixed
messages in just a few moments with the Q&A. But before we do that, very excited to reintroduce Mr. Andrew Cox to you. As mentioned, he is a senior equity specialist with Janice Henderson here in Asia, based in Singapore. And he's going to tell us a little bit about what is going on in healthcare and what you should be doing about it, most importantly. Andrew, over to you.
Well, we think it's particularly interesting to talk about it now. Last year we spent a lot of the time about the macro, worrying about recessions. We also spent a lot of time talking about technology, generative AI, all the innovation coming from that sector. And when you think about it, it's not surprising that technology is a long-term outperformer. We all use technology all the time. Our smartphone, we live our lives with it. In our businesses, it makes things cheaper, more efficient, better. And it's key to everything we do. But it's often not realised that healthcare has also been a long-term outperformer of what's going on in the market. So all these data points, it's sometimes helpful just to take a step back and say to yourselves, what do I really believe in? What do I get conviction on? What do I think will have a profound effect on my life and the lives of people around me? I think we can all agree that during our lives, we've seen improvements in that healthcare we get, the prospects should we get an illness in terms of the treatments that we can hope to have. The blockbuster drugs, these are the ones that generate over $1 billion in sales a year. We've seen a 70-fold increase in those since 2000, so a real increase in these highly monetizable opportunities. So it's an innovation that's very important, the innovation that gives the sector the secular growth. 2024, we expect this to be another record year in terms of new drug approvals, new launches coming to the market. And that's really important because there's lots of areas that still need addressing in terms of new treatments. And that means there's enormous opportunities for investors to capitalise on new potential blockbuster drugs. But more importantly, more opportunities for patients to get treated for illnesses and therefore extend and have a better quality of life. And that really leads us to demand. We all want to live longer. We all want to live better. We're therefore willing to spend our money on healthcare for ourselves and for our lovely innovation is what's delivering the returns. Since 2000, healthcare has delivered about 150% return versus the wider equity market. Yet last year, it really underperformed by about 20%. And that again is an opportunity we see given these very attractive dynamics. Healthcare can also be resilient, as I said earlier. You think about it, if your investments go down or your business isn't doing so well, you may cut back on holidays or watches or handbags. But one thing you won't cut back on is healthcare and medicines for family or yourself. And that's again why healthcare can typically be very resilient in a downturn. This is innovation that's very important, and I now want to address some of the areas where we've seen some good innovation coming through in the past few years and see good progress today. One of these is a horrible disease that affects young children called Duchenne muscular dystrophy. It's a muscle wasting disease, and until recently, sadly, the parents and the children themselves affected by this have had very little hope. But we're seeing some great progress through gene therapy, which this video, which I'll show you now, highlights.
The goal of gene therapy is to slow down or stabilize the progression of a specific blood dystrophy. We'll talk more about how gene therapy may work, but to do that, first, we need to understand the role proteins play in our bodies. Proteins do important jobs inside our muscles. They're the building blocks of how we function. Sometimes a person may have an altered gene, which means their body may not make enough of a particular protein. When this happens, the protein cannot do its job correctly and our bodies may not function properly. This is where scientists investigating gene therapy come in. Gene therapy is designed to introduce a healthy gene into a person in order to make a new protein that was previously missing or not working well. Gene therapy is made of 3 components: the transgene, which aims to produce a functioning version of the protein of interest; the vector, whose job is to deliver the transgene to the targeted cells in the body; and the promoter, which makes sure that the protein is made or replicated. Together, these 3 parts of gene therapy are intended to slow or stabilize disease. Scientists are testing to see if the new protein starts doing a job that wasn't previously there. Even though all gene therapy uses a vector, a promoter, and a transgene, they are not all the same. The vector, promoter, and transgene may differ across gene therapies, even if they aim to treat the same disease. The choice of the vector, promoter, and transgene can impact safety and how well the gene therapy works.
So it's hard to get it right, but we're seeing some great progress, aided by increased scientific productivity and technology, and some of the clinical trials going on in this area suggesting that we should soon get some hope for patients with this condition. So gene therapy like that is a very big area. There's over 7,000 genetic diseases, of which over 90% don't yet have treatments. At the end of the last year, we saw a breakthrough in the first approval for gene editing in the US. We saw this as a landmark because it was the first. And only a couple of weeks ago, we saw the second coming through. So again, we're seeing rapid innovation and treating more and more of these diseases. But it's not just about treatments important, it's also about diagnostics, spotting diseases earlier. Technology can really make this cheaper, more accessible to more people, which as we have a growing and aging population is very important. So a lot of opportunities to diagnose diseases earlier and treat them. And cancer remains a major area, unfortunately will affect a lot of us. Anyone who's had chemotherapy or loved ones who've had chemotherapy knows how difficult it can be on the body. But one area we're seeing breakthrough is antibody drug conjugates, ADCs. It's a type of cancer treatment that's proving more effective than traditional chemotherapy. And again, I want to show you a short video just to show you how it's becoming more effective at the treatment.
A challenge of cancer treatment is doing our best to ensure that the benefits a medicine brings outweigh the burden of unwanted side effects. Take chemotherapy, for example. It's a powerful treatment which kills cancer cells. But in doing so, it doesn't differentiate between cancer cells and healthy ones. So it damages healthy cells too, leading to side effects like hair loss and tiredness. Monoclonal antibodies are also used to treat cancer, and are capable of being targeted that's where antibody-drug conjugates, or ADCs, come in. There are three parts to ADCs. First, a monoclonal antibody that targets a specific protein on the surface of cancer cells. Second, a potent chemotherapy drug. And finally, linker molecules that attach the chemotherapy drug securely to the antibody, breaking only when the chemotherapy is inside cancer cells. So, ADCs are designed to specifically seek out cancer cells and deliver their chemotherapy payload directly into these cells, limiting damage to healthy ones. For patients, this potentially means fewer unwanted side effects commonly associated with chemotherapy, but all the cancer-killing power.
And anyone with cancer, that's what you want to hear. Treatments that give you better results with less side effects. We kind of liken this to a precision-guided missile that comes through the roof, hits the target without causing widespread damage around it. So with chemotherapy, it's not harming the healthy cells in the same way as traditional chemotherapy, which is leading to less side effects, positive for outcomes for patients. Let's move to a different area now. The most talked about drugs last year, which was the GLP-1 anti-obesity drugs. We touched on them earlier. They were the major innovation that everyone was talking about. And the reason everyone's been talking about them is because of the impact they're perceived to be able to make. And you may ask why I've got Oprah Winfrey on the slide. Well, Oprah, a leading US talk show host, is very well known for her struggles with weight loss and dieting and keeping weight off. And it's very significant at the end of last year when she came out and said she saw a place for medicine and medication to help people lose weight. Because obesity is such a major problem. It's a leading cause of other diseases, whether it's diabetes, cardiovascular. You may be familiar with these GLP-1 drugs. They've been around for about 18 years. If you're diabetic, you may have been taking them to help with insulin and to manage your blood glucose levels. But actually, one of the side effects that was observed from these drugs was weight loss and a suppression of appetite. And the healthcare industry worked with this, and last year approved the first drugs specifically for weight loss. Penetration is still relatively low. We think this is going to be, it feeds information to your smartphone as we speak, as you eat. We know what's happening. You may have an insulin pump that's giving you insulin as your body needs it. This allows you to have a full and very normal kind of quality of life, not inconvenience in the same way you used to be by having to have glucose readings, search data, able to do tests with a lot more efficiency, understanding how relationships between molecules will work, is pulling in information, monitoring trials, monitoring safety information. It's really speeding up the drug discovery process. We're also seeing it used in a clinical setting. So for example, when you go to a doctor, they listen to your heart. That's just a stethoscope that they can hear your heartbeat. But actually we're seeing testing now of stethoscopes that link to artificial intelligence databases that can give real-time information to the doctor as to what's going on, which will advise them whether you need to see a cardiologist very quickly or slightly less important. So it helps the doctors, it helps the patients have a more effective treatment and diagnosis. I think we may have lost the technology. We're on the technology slide. Can you skip the next slide, please? Well, the next slide is on robotic surgery. Now, robotic surgery, a lot of people wouldn't particularly enjoy the idea of having a robot operate on them, but actually robotic surgery should be thought about as being precision-assisted surgery that helps doctors and surgeons be more accurate. It leads to less scarring, quicker healing, and a more precise result. So actually, when it comes to thinking about seeing a surgeon, having an operation, on average, these are the big drug giants that we know about: the Pfizers, the Roche, the Eli Lillys. These companies have got a very diversified book of drugs, syringes, packaging. All of these things are very vital to the healthcare industry. And finally, we've got healthcare services. These are the insurance companies, the diagnostic labs you may be familiar with. The second major headwind we had was interest rates, particularly for the biotech sector. Interest rates are perceived to be negative because these companies are not earning profits. So between these new drugs coming from the biotech sector, they want to replace their existing drugs who may have patents expiring. We may have drugs that have got new drugs coming to the market to be a competitive pitfalls and the challenges of getting drugs approved. And that's why we think this is a sector that's very well suited, not to an ETF or to
We didn't have a chance to explain why in the main presentation. Perhaps you could give us a few comments on why we continue to like Japan, given how much it's gone up. Still interesting, and India as well, please.
Sure, look, I think Japan is the return equity of listed companies in Japan. And this is partly pushed by the Tokyo Stock Exchange, partly as a result of demographics and large number of retiring people, and that gives the companies an opportunity to improve productivity and control labor costs. Partly because of China, right? A lot of capital, supply chain diversification, a lot of capital flying out, and Japan being seen as the preferred channel to access Asian development by global investors. So there's a lot of these trends that I think are not just one-year phenomenons. And we continue to see the earnings picture in Japan becoming, staying relatively robust.
So if you think about Japan's performance last year, it did very well in yen terms, but because of the weak yen in dollar terms, it kind of negated a lot of it. One of our views here is that the ability
The oil price. Actually, this is more related to politics, so I'll hold that one for the
8-10% just in the last kind of like 4 or 5 days. So there is definitely a bit of a